This is Catherine Moore on Exposing a Monster podcast. Thank you for joining me for this session. You can also call me Kay. There were a couple of things that I remembered. One of them was I was talking about a procedure that I went through as a child, and it was called, and I don't know, I hope I say it right, it was a cystoscope or cystoscopy. I can't say it right. It's medical imaging, and it's where they send a tube up through the urethra to look at the urinary tract. And the reason why they were doing that is because I was having frequent urinary tract infections, and the reason why I was having frequent urinary tract infections was because I was enduring child abuse, sexual abuse from my father, and my mother was assisting him. And that day was not a fun day. It was pretty horrific and humiliating and degrading and all of that. They put a tube through my urethra, and they were saying to, I guess, gloss over what was going on and the discomfort that I was feeling and the fact that I was begging them to stop. They were saying, oh, look, you can see yourself on camera, because I'm so sure every child wants to see their urethra on camera. Anyway, that's sarcasm on my part. That day I was sedated, and my parents, after the procedure, I walked to the car. Of course, my parents didn't have the decency, after they put me through that hell, to literally carry me to the car. I was 6 or 7 years of age at the time, and I was not at all prepared for what I was about to go through when they brought me in for that procedure. Also, there was a memory, because memories come back to me after I do this, so I also wanted to bring up a memory that I forgot to share. It's a story I forgot to share of one of the times that I was abused when my parents drugged me. We had moved to Groom, Texas from Amarillo, and it was in July of that summer. They were having a 4th of July parade. I remember my mother giving me the codeine that morning, and I could not keep it down. My parents, I wanted to go to the parade, but I was really too sick to go. But we went anyway. And I remember my parents had to leave early because I was just too weak and lethargic to enjoy the parade. And why was I too weak and lethargic at the age of 6 or 7 to enjoy a 4th of July parade? It was because my parents had been drugging me with a narcotic, codeine, so that my father could sexually assault me. And this is when my father decided to become a United Methodist minister, and it's when he became employed under the Northwest Texas Conference in the United Methodist denomination in the Panhandle. They brought me home that day from the parade, and I remember my mother giving me a dose of the codeine once again. I remember just being out of it, making my way through the hallway of the house into the bedroom. And there was a windowsill beside me. On the side of the bed, I remember crawling into bed. My father was beside me in the bed. And that is all I remember after that. My mother did not deny that it happened when I spoke with her, and she also did not expect me to remember these events. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to recall it until I was around 39, 40 years of age, which was devastating because I felt like an idiot for not realizing, because it took me decades to figure out what had happened. we were in, when we were, I also spoke about when my father became employed, transferred from the Northwest Texas Conference to the Texas Annual Conference, and we had moved to Northeast Texas to a small community called Carlisle, and it was also called Price, Texas. And it is up in Northeast Texas, close to Henderson, Texas, and Troop, Texas, which is also near Longview, Texas. The Carlisle and Henry's Chapel were the first two churches that my parents, that my father pastored in the Texas Annual Conference. They were the first two churches that my father was assigned to pastor by the Texas Annual Conference administration. I also remember the shame that I went through during that time. I started entering puberty and experiencing changes to my body around the time that I was 9 years of age, or even before that, around 8 years of age, which was early. And my mother would body shame me. I would, whenever it was time to take a bath, as I would take my clothes off, my mother would point to parts of my body where I was developing, and she would shame me because I was going into puberty. And then another time I remember I went and I took my clothes off really fast because I don't know, I guess I thought somehow in my mind that I could, if I just took my clothes off really fast and I didn't strip down in front of my mother, maybe I would be spared the humiliation of my mother pointing and body shaming me. But when I did that, she shamed me because I stripped down and was in a hurry to go take a bath before she would have a chance to point and body shame me for developing and going into puberty. This was while my father was pastoring his first two churches in the Texas Annual Conference, the Texas Annual Conference Administration, that is located in Houston. The Texas Annual Conference Administration used to cover 1,000 churches. They don't cover that many churches anymore because there has since been a separation in the denomination over the LGBTQ community. And unfortunately, because my mother would shame me, would body shame me, it certainly didn't help the shame that I already had, and the hatred I had for myself that was already ingrained in me because of the horrific abuse I had already endured before we went to Carlisle. I also remember going through a depression at that time. I was obsessed with the thought of this dread of getting old, which is not typical for a 9-year-old. I didn't understand why I was, I don't think that the depression was about getting old. At the time, that was what I was fixated on. But I think what it was really about internally was the trauma that I had experienced before that move and had not even had an opportunity to process that trauma. There was absolutely no way to process that trauma. And when you can't process trauma, it is like you are being held underwater and there is no way to come up for air. You are just spending your time underwater and there is no oxygen. That is what it's like enduring trauma after trauma after trauma, and you can't process it. You don't have the tools, you don't have a name for it. You don't know why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. You don't know why things don't feel, why something feels off, or you can't understand why you're upset all the time. You can't process why you hate yourself. You can't process why God hates you in your mind. And my third grade, I spent my third and fourth grade year at Carlisle School. I learned at a very early age. I remember learning a valuable lesson that I carried with me. I would learn something new at each school. By the time I graduated from high school, I had been to 12 different schools. The most important lesson that I learned at Carlisle was once I would go to a new school, I did not tell anybody anything about the last school that I attended. I didn't talk about the friends I had. I didn't talk about if I was bullied. I didn't talk about who bullied me or what I was called. I didn't tell anybody anything. I hated the teacher that I had. I didn't like either teacher in the third or fourth grade. And of course, the 80s teachers, I've never been fond of the school system, the education system in the state of Texas. Carmen Huntington was my third grade teacher, and I remember she would also shame me, which really just enforced the shame that my parents would put me through. And when I did not want my father touching me, he would lay a guilt trip on me. And what I remember was just not wanting anybody to touch me at all. And then whenever I would go to church, these older ladies would want to hug me and love on me. And I just wanted to be left the hell alone, because it had just been the prior year that I was being, going through those medical procedures. It was like 2 years before that I went through those medical procedures, and there was not any opportunity to process all of that trauma. I did not feel like my body belonged to me. The things my mother would say to me back then were so hateful. I remember standing waiting for the bus one morning. This happened on more than one occasion. Just standing waiting for the bus, and I started developing, and my mother would literally shame me just standing there waiting for the bus and tell me I needed a bra. So my mother would shame me when it was her responsibility to go and buy me the damn bra. But somehow, I don't know, I guess, at 9 years of age, I was supposed to just jump in a car and go drive to Walmart and go buy a damn bra, training bra. And my parents were very sick and very slimy, and people really had no idea how sick they were behind closed doors. During the summer, one summer, there was a family that were members of Henry's Chapel, United Methodist Church, and their kids were close to my age, and I would spend Sundays with their kids after church until my parents got out of the other church that my father was pastoring. And they had those two kids had a swimming pool, and they had an in-ground swimming pool in their backyard. My mother loved to insult me in front of other people. she loved to gossip in front of in she loved to gossip about me in front of me to other people. She would insult me in front of other people. And I had swimming lessons, but because there was very little in my life that was consistent and we were constantly moving about every year to 2 years, it was hard to be committed to anything. And I was swimming with them that day. I'll call the girl's name Sarah. And Sarah was going out with 2 of her cousins who were teenagers, and she was dressed up and excited about going, and I was envious because she was going to go out and have fun, and she had nice things. Her parents bought her nice clothes. They had a much more comfortable life financially than my parents did. And my mother was sitting there at the time because I was struggling to swim and I was staying in the shallow end. And my mother was sitting there insulting me to Sarah's mother the entire time because I had not had enough training to learn how to swim independently in the deep end of the pool. And what my mother said that day stayed with me. And it took me decades to process it. She had said that the next week she was going to bring me back to their swimming pool, and she was going to throw me in the water and watch me struggle to stay above water, and said that that was how I was going to learn how to swim. And my mother had called one of the older ladies that day to give us a ride back home because we only had one car at the time, and my father was off doing something. And I remember even after we got in the car, my mother was still threatening me with it, saying that she was going to take me back to the pool, their in-ground pool, and throw me in. And I was going to be forced to tread water, and I was either going to sink or swim. And I was afraid for my life. Decades later, I contacted law enforcement near there, and they came close to filing charges against my mother, and I found out that day that there was a statute of limitations, and it had run out 2 years after that date. And unfortunately, because I was so young, I had no idea. And I will call Sarah's mother Tracy. Tracy knew what my mother had said, and she was a witness to my mother threatening to throw me in the pool and leave and basically risk my life for the sake of teaching me how to swim. And I can't imagine saying that to one of my children. I couldn't live with myself. I certainly wouldn't be able to sleep at night. And it would be a cold day in hell before I would ever do anything like that to one of my kids. And even if somebody had reported my mother for that, she probably would have gotten away with it because we were in Cherokee County, and my mother was related to the Cherokee County judge. I realized that decades later. It wouldn't have mattered. Even if somebody had spoke up and reported it, she probably would have gotten away with it simply because she was related to the Hassel family. After we lived in Carlisle, we moved to Omaha, a small town called Omaha, Texas. And my father was assigned for the First United Methodist Church and Dalby Springs United Methodist Church. And those two churches, they were two small churches in rural areas, and they were under the administration of the Texas Annual Conference at the time. And my father was placed on assignment to pastor those two churches. And we lived in a small parsonage that was owned by Omaha First United Methodist Church. And we lived on the same block with the family who was over the Omaha First Baptist Church. And the First Baptist Church and the Baptist Parsonage and the First Methodist Church and the Methodist Parsonage were all on the same block. And they had a daughter whose name was Tracy, and she and I were rivals, and we did not get along. Tracy was a preacher's kid as well, but she was a rebel, and I was not. And we were at Omaha for 3 years, which was at the time the longest I had ever lived anywhere. And one of my saving graces when I was a child, and I really do think that I may have turned out like an absolute heathen if it weren't for the older ladies in the church, honestly. At Henry's Chapel, one of the older ladies that really made a huge difference with me was Ruth Davis. Ruth Davis was one of the first people to accompany me on a solo. And after she died, I would have dreams of her accompanying me, and there would be children surrounding the piano as she played, and we all sang. And if you had known Ruth Davis, you would know that that would have been fitting, that it would have made sense to be standing beside her around gathered with other children singing hymns as she played the piano. Ruth Davis was one of the most loving people. And I would go with walks with I would go on walks with Ruth Davis after school, and we would pick wildflowers on the road. They had a tractor swing that they had painted white and connected with rope or chains and hooked it to a tree limb, hung it from a tree limb. And so I would play on that swing, and I would go over to Ruth Davis's house when I was in the 3rd and 4th grade. And it was the one time that I felt like a kid. I enjoyed going over to Ruth Davis's house way more than I ever enjoyed going over to Jen Skalnick's house. Ruth Davis respected my personal space. She didn't, she wasn't handsy with me, which I totally appreciated. She was just very loving and accepting, and just saw me as a kid. And Alvin Davis, her husband, was wonderful. I remember he was this tall man that wore overalls and had snow white hair and glasses. And when we were in Omaha, Texas, there was Virginia Atkinson who would give me gifts on special occasions, like for Valentine's Day or Easter or Christmas. One Christmas, she gave me a leather purse, and I still have that leather purse. And I spoke with Virginia Atkinson's daughter decades later because I had had a dream that Virginia Atkinson had, she had visited me in the dream, and I tracked her daughter down and I spoke with her daughter, and her daughter had told me that Virginia Atkinson told her about me. And I sobbed. I broke down over the phone because Virginia Atkinson had told her daughter that I had had a hard life, and I never told Virginia Atkinson anything about my life. She just saw right through me. And she didn't try to hug me. She always respected my personal space. Instead, the way that she showed me love was by giving me gifts. Or when I would go over to her house, she had these candy, like Brock's candy. I don't know if you remember, you could find them in Walmart. They used to sell them in bulk. And they would have these Neapolitan Brock's candies with coconut. And it would have like one part would be chocolate, the other part would be pink, and then the other part would be white. I've tried to find those and I can't find them. And Virginia Atkinson would have those in a little candy dish on her coffee table, and I would eat those as I was sitting there on her couch in her living room. I spent the night with her one night, and I remember asking her if she had had any grandchildren. And she said her daughters did not have any children, but she had me. And I was taken back because I really didn't know what to say to that as a child, because I think in my thinking, it would not have occurred to me that anybody would want me, that anybody would want to keep me, or anybody would want to claim me. And I didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it, I guess, because I just didn't take it serious. Like this, she probably says it, but of course, she probably didn't mean it. And she would go and visit her daughter in Hawaii, and her daughter, she would her daughter was a flight attendant, and so she brought me like snacks from the plane, and she brought me a lei from Hawaii. And I remember one Valentine's Day, she gave me like a little glass heart jewelry container. And I cherish the memories that I have. Another evening, it was the first Christmas we had in Omaha. My parents had to go to a Christmas party. And my parents wanted me to stay with Helene Thigpen during that time while they went to their Christmas party. So I did. I stayed with Helene Thigpen, and I really didn't know her. It was my first time meeting her. And she was absolutely wonderful. And I helped Helene Thigpen decorate her tree that night. And it was a wonderful experience. Helene Thigpen had a way of showing you love. And the way that she carried herself, you could tell that she was a strong woman. She had survived more than one husband. She had experienced a lot of loss in life. So in the way that she carried herself and she spoke to you or anyone, you could tell that she was a very strong woman. And she knew how to love people where they were. She knew that life was hard. And she was not afraid to love people. She was very motherly to me. And I remember she would usually have fresh cut up cold watermelon in her fridge. And I knew that was where I could go when I wanted fresh cut up watermelon. And I would sit on their couch and watch MTV because I couldn't watch MTV at home. And they didn't care if I watched MTV. And that, for me, that at the time, that was a big deal. And the next year, Helene Thigpen wanted me to come and help her decorate her Christmas tree again. And I'm going over, but that's okay. She came and got me from school so that I could come home with her and help her decorate her tree. And I did. I helped her decorate her tree. And we had a wonderful time doing that, decorating her tree. And then she took me home that day. And when she took me home that day, she gave me a $10 bill. And that meant a lot to me. I'm not really big on gifts. I don't really care if anybody gives me anything. I don't have a sense of entitlement. But as a child, I did appreciate it when people gave me things because I didn't want to be touched. That was one of the ways that and I don't know if there was like an angel or if angels exist or if there was like a higher power looking out for me or some type of divine being looking out for me that knew that I needed someone to love me in a way that I could handle being loved. And Virginia Atkinson and Ruth Davis and Miss Neal in Groom, Texas, when she made those frilly dresses that I could twirl around in at 6 or 7 years of age and actually feel like a little girl, because I didn't feel like a little girl then, and I couldn't explain why. I didn't know why. It was those ladies and other ladies that I will tell you about that saved me and showed me how to love people where they are, and showed me how to treat people with kindness and grace, and showed me what my parents were not capable of showing me, how to treat people like decent human beings. And that is all I have for this episode. You can catch me on the next episode.